Hi, this is Joe with PHE Recovery and Performance. Previously, we talked about the four components of health: movement, diet, recovery, and mindset. In this video, we'll examine the diet component or pillar of your health. When we look at diet, there's two things we're going to look at. We're going to look at things we want to eliminate and things we want to add or increase to our diet to improve our health. As far as things to eliminate, here's a list of several: added sugars, processed foods, seed oils, or polyunsaturated fatty acids. Let's take a look at each of these. Eliminating added sugars means we're trying to eliminate sugar as an ingredient in the food we're eating. Sometimes, like fruit has naturally occurring sugars, we're not talking about that. We're talking about eliminating sugar as an ingredient. So as a reminder, table sugar is known as sucrose. Sucrose is actually combined of two types of sugar, glucose and fructose. The importance of this is that fructose can only be processed in the liver. The liver converts fructose into glucose, which is a more usable form in your body. However, when you have too much glucose, the liver will store this fructose as triglycerides, which some of you might have seen on your blood tests when you go to your doctor. Another thing about added sugar, or specifically refined sugar in your diet, studies show that that can also increase inflammation. When we think about sugary foods, some are easily come to mind: candy, dessert, snacks, cakes, regular sodas, energy drinks, sports drinks, sweetened teas, things like that. So that's pretty easy to eliminate foods that are readily known to have sugar. However, there are some surprise foods that have sugar in them: cereals, breads, granola bars, lower calorie drinks, sometimes even lower fat items. When the fat is removed, manufacturers often add sugar to make sure that the product tastes good. Another hidden surprise place to find sugar is in sauces or condiments. Tomato ketchup, relish, and teriyaki sauce or other dressings often have a lot of sugar in them, so be careful and check the label. When you're looking at the label, I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are the different ways that manufacturers can put sugar in the food without writing the word sugar on the label. So you might see fructose or maltose or lactose or glucose or evaporated cane juice. These are all types of sugars that you're looking to eliminate from your diet. The next thing we want to avoid or eliminate is processed food. Processed foods are lower in nutrients, and the more processing, the more likely that food is to contribute to inflammation. So we talked about sugar contributes or causes inflammation. Processed foods cause inflammation. We'll talk about what those causes can result in a little bit later, but just know we want to try to reduce the amount of inflammation in our body. Some tips to avoid processed foods are to buy foods that are minimally processed. I know that makes sense, but if you think about fresh vegetables or seafood or beef or chicken, right, you're buying that thing. You're not buying a boxed ingredient that has or a boxed food that has a lot of ingredients. Another tip to minimize processed foods is to shop the perimeter or the outside area of the grocery store. So if you think about your typical grocery store, the meat and produce and seafood counters are around the outside, and then cheese and dairy is often on the outside as well. If you go down the middle aisles and think about most of your local supermarkets, that's where a lot of the processed foods are. So let's talk about fats. Saturated versus monounsaturated versus polyunsaturated. Let's take a look at what each of these means. A saturated fat, if you look at the diagram, all of the hydrogen bonds are filled. They're solid at room temperature, and some common saturated fats are butter, coconut oil, cocoa butter, or fatty meats. When we think of or we're talking about monounsaturated fat, if you look at the diagram, one of the bonds is unsaturated. This makes the fat liquid at room temperature, and some common sources of monounsaturated fats are nuts, egg yolks, olives, avocado, animal fat, and fatty fishes. SMASH is an acronym for salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardine, and herring. So those are all fatty fishes. Finally, polyunsaturated fat, looking at the diagram, there's more than one or many carbon bonds are unsaturated. This makes the fat very fragile and easily attacked or broken by oxygen and other um, chemicals. We'll talk about that in a second. But polyunsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature and are traditionally corn and seed oils. So because of those double bonds that we talked about, the differences between the fats, these polyunsaturated fats, or PUFA, are highly unstable and it's more susceptible to oxidation. Oxidation, chemically, we're talking about, it means it's losing an electron. But when you think about it, think about oxidation like on iron is rust or an apple turning brown. So that's some common ways to think about what oxidation looks like. But chemically, it just means it's losing an electron. Because of the unsaturated bonds, polyunsaturated fats are highly likely and more susceptible to oxidation. Continuing to look at these polyunsaturated fatty acids, they're also high in omega-6 fatty acids. So when you look at a standard American diet, it's traditionally high in omega-6 and low in omega-3 fatty acids. So the ratio of these two fatty acids is very important. Omega-6 is pro-inflammatory, meaning that it causes an inflammation. Omega-3 doesn't, but the ratio is what's more important here. So if you have a diet with lots of omega-6 and not much omega-3, that's going to cause more inflammation, right? So we talked about other causes of inflammation. Here's polyunsaturated fat adding to the inflammation. However, if you have a diet with lots of omega-3, think fish oil, things like that, and not much omega-6, that actually reduces inflammation. Let's look at some sources of polyunsaturated fatty acid, or PUFA. Chicken and pork fat contain a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acid. Specifically, there's higher levels in grain-fed or more factory-farmed animals because these chicken and the pork, or the pigs, are eating corn and soy, which have the seed oil that we looked at earlier. Other sources of PUFA include nuts, walnuts, cashews, etc. Macadamia nuts, however, are the lowest omega-6. Legumes, so peanuts, are high in omega-6, and margarine, which is derived from seed oils, also has PUFA in it as well. A surprise here is processed crackers and biscuits. However, they're usually fried in seed oils, so that's why they have a high content of PUFA. And then finally, many commercial oils and dressings are typically made from seed oils and contain a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids. So seed oils, friend or foe? Let's kind of take a look at this real quick. As we talked about, cooking with these oils can cause oxidation. We talked about oxidation a little bit ago. In addition to causing oxidation when you're cooking or whatever, the oils themselves can produce oxidative stress within your body. One other component to help you decide whether the vegetable or seed oils are friend or foe is the extraction process. Extracting the oil from the seeds often requires chemicals like hexane and other chemical solvents. Those chemicals are often residual in the oil itself. So one way to look at these oils is think of the source of the oil and think of how hard or easy it would be to get oil out of that thing. So for example, if you think of corn, right, a kernel of corn, how much effort or how much chemical treatment would it take to remove the oil from a kernel of corn or a cob of corn? So that's pretty hard. So it's going to take, a lot of processing. So that's not as healthy as something like an olive. An olive is pretty oily or greasy, so it wouldn't take as much effort. You squeeze it and the oil comes right out. So that's going to be less processing. So that's going to be better for your health. So we talked about all the different kinds of seed oils and what happens. So here's a quick graphic to kind of summarize what we're talking about. Omega-6 seed oils, right, increase the omega-6. They cause a lot of oxidation in the omega-6 fats in your LDL, right, part of your blood, which leads to both inflammation as well as a rise in C-reactive protein, which is another thing you might see on your blood test. Basically, C-reactive protein itself is something that increases in your body when there's a lot of inflammation. The test that you can get a blood test is a C-reactive protein test, is testing to see how much of the C-reactive protein you have as a kind of an indicator of how much inflammation is in your body. We've talked about oils and we've talked about all these things, and I couldn't have a discussion of diet without talking about carbs. We always say avoid carbs, carbs are the enemy. Well, based on all the things we've been talking about, carbs aren't necessarily the enemy as much as some of the other things we're talking about. So research actually suggests that linoleic acid is a bigger problem for health versus carbs or fat or meat or anything like that. Sources of linoleic acid, I'm not going to go through these, but the highest components of these seed oils are primarily linoleic acid. So safflower, grapeseed, poppy seed, sunflower, corn oil are all in the top 5 or 6, with safflower oil being almost 80% linoleic acid. If you look towards the bottom of the table, butter and coconut oil and cocoa butter and macadamia oil are very low in linoleic acid. So those are better to use for your health. So let's look at the linoleic acid and talk about that. So it's an omega-6 fatty acid, right? So we talked about omega-6 is pro-inflammatory. When we eat linoleic acid, it actually goes into our visceral or subcutaneous. So visceral means around the organs. Subcutaneous is under the skin in your fat cells. So you're absorbing part of the linoleic acid, and it makes those fat cells insulin sensitive, which means as your body's secreting insulin in normal processes, those fat cells will tend to grow. Well, for a healthy body and health in long life, we want these fat cells, or adipocytes as they're called, to be insulin resistant. So we have to reduce the amount of linoleic acid we eat. Studies have suggested that eating saturated fat from animals, which is actually stearic acid, helps the fat cells remain insulin resistant and actually might switch them from being insulin sensitive to being insulin resistant. So where is this linoleic acid coming from? So we talked about chicken and pork. So cows and pigs that are fed corn and soy, they're monogastric, just like us. They have one stomach. So chickens, pigs, and ourselves, humans, when we eat corn and soy, we eat the food and it circulates in our body, goes to our digestive system, and we will absorb and store the linoleic acid in our fat. So when we eat chicken and pork, that's a primary source of linoleic acid. The actual surprise, or what everyone thinks, oh, I'm going to avoid red meat, I'm going to eat chicken. Well, chicken is the primary dietary source of linoleic acid, with one exception. If you have a local farmer that doesn't feed their chicken corn or soy, and they just go out in the pasture and they eat grass and dirt and bugs, that chicken will not have as much linoleic acid. Primarily, chicken is industrially raised and traditionally fed corn and soy, so most chicken at the store, unless you have a special local farmer, has linoleic acid. One note here is that ruminants fed corn and soy are high in linoleic acid. So a ruminant is cattle, sheep, goats, buffalo, deer, and elk. Their bodies are able to process the linoleic acid from corn and soy, and they convert it into the stearic acid, which we said was good for us. I wanted to include a discussion on migraines just to show you how important and sometimes surprising the impact of your diet might have on your health. So there was a randomized trial, and let's talk about the people in the trial prior to what they did. So prior to the intervention, the group averaged 23 headache days per month and 10 headache hours per day, even though the people in this study were on an average of 6 different headache-related medications, right? So that's a lot of headaches, and I, sympathize with the migraine sufferers. Here's the interesting thing. A combination of increasing their omega-3, which is shown here as N3, so increasing omega-3 while reducing the omega-6 or N6 linoleic acid showed a statistically significant, clinically relevant improvement in headache hours per day, the number of headache days, and also their headache-related quality of life as compared to just lowering the omega-6. So adding more omega-3s and reducing your omega-6 linoleic acid can impact if you're a migraine sufferer. Just want to throw that in there as a kind of a surprise to show how big the effect of diet can be on your health. All right, so we talked about all the things to get rid of. Let's talk about the things we're going to add or increase in our diet. Right? We talked about whole foods, minimally processed foods. We want to eat grass-fed, grass-finished meats, right? So when we think about things that are fed corn or soy, if the animal is not fed corn or soy, like grass-fed and grass-finished, it won't have that polyunsaturated fat or linoleic acid in it. Vitamin D, that's something to add or increase in your body. So there's certain foods, salmon, herring, sardines, egg yolks, beef liver, canned tuna. Those are food sources of vitamin D. However, it's important that you include sunshine, and granted it's not part of your diet, but sunshine plus the foods above, your body will actually make the vitamin D. So 10 to 20 minutes of sunlight, midday is the best kind of time if you can. If not, kind of maybe take a walk break. But your skin needs UVB, right? So the important thing is to get outside because as the note there says, UVB doesn't pass through windows. You have to go out and actually expose your skin to the sunlight. As an interesting fact, in the US, the overall rate of vitamin D deficiency is 41%. So you might not know it. Certain populations have higher vitamin D deficiency, but generally speaking, almost half of the US is vitamin D deficient. And vitamin D is important in your immune function and other bodily functions, so it's important to make sure you have enough vitamin D. So food is both fuel and information, right? So it's fuel, we talked about, your body breaks down and digests it and gives you energy, but it's also information. So we're back to our friend linoleic acid here. Linoleic acid in vegetable oils have a metabolic signaling effect, right? So as we talked about it tells your fat cells to grow. However, some interesting kind of science here is that the half-life, meaning how long it's going to take like your body to get rid of half of it, is more than a year and a half or 2 years, right? So if you get these hormones from the vegetable oils or the linoleic acid, remember from the animals that were fed corn or soy or were eating the seed oil directly, these products can stay in your body for maybe 2 years after you stop eating it in excess. If you have some now and again, that's one thing, but if you're constantly eating linoleic acid and seed oils and stop today, let's say, it may take 2 years for your body to fully process all of that out and to reduce it to a level where your cells can normally function. The one thing to remember that we talked about, stearic acid has been shown maybe to help out with that. So that's kind of one thing you can do to help out. One last topic about diet that we want to talk about is insulin resistance. Insulin's a master hormone. It actually controls blood sugar regulation, which we talked about a little bit. Your body secretes insulin to control your blood sugar. It actually also controls, insulin that is, controls lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat cells in your adipocytes, which we said are the fat cells. And insulin is actually really important as it directs your immune system. One final topic to talk about in diet is insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is when the cells in your muscles, body fat, and liver start resisting or ignoring the signal that the hormone insulin is trying to tell them what to do. So an example of this is shown here in this infinite loop. So you feel hangry, hungry and angry. You eat carbs or sugar, right? You just get a sugary drink or some carbs. Your body senses the influx of sugar. It secretes insulin. However, if you're used to this cycle already, if you've been around it a couple times, your cells are resisting the insulin. So now, remember, we have excess sugar. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to store that sugar as fat. The cells aren't fed, right? Because we haven't done anything to help anything out. And you're going to stay and you're going to feel hungry, and continue on this loop, right? So we want our cells to be insulin sensitive. So that's the importance of making sure we're avoiding sugar. And also we talked about how some of these seed oils contribute to our fat cells being insulin sensitive. We actually want to make sure the fat cells stay insulin resistant. So these are some ways that you can increase your health by focusing on your diet.